Okay, welcome to part 2 of our lecture on social psychology. In this section, we're going to take a look at social influence. And you can see it up here in our cute little cartoon up here on conformity. It's the one that is different that gets left out in the cold. And this is kind of going to be the theme of this section, where particularly as we study the phenomenon of conformity. First off, we start off with looking at the notion of social influence. And some social psychologists believe this is one of the greatest contributions, is to look at how others influence our attitudes, beliefs, decisions, and actions. And we can see here in the little cartoon, which is kind of cute, is that be like all your friends and express your individuality. Get a tattoo. But are you really expressing your individuality if all your friends have it? More or less what you're doing is conforming. So the sign, while it stresses individuality, is really asking you to conform. Okay? When we look at conformity and obedience, and going to be the topic for the majority of this section, is that we come and take a look at the phenomenon that behavior is contagious. Okay, behavior modeled by one is oftentimes followed by another, and we follow the behavior of others generally to conform. So if we see somebody do something, we go, I guess that's what you do here. And then, particularly when you go into a new situation, you're trying to figure out, well, gee, how do people behave and things like that. You look to observe others, and then you oftentimes find yourself mimicking or emulating that very behavior so as you conform or fit in. Other behaviors may be an expression of compliance, obedience toward authority. And so we sometimes we come in order because of conformity, we come in line with others, and others sometimes we do it is to express our compliance with their rules for fear that we will be left out on the cold like that poor little penguin if we don't. Conformity here is we see the 3 young ladies here all showing off their same tattoo, but it's like one got one got it, and the others must get it too. And so it's adjusting one's behavior or thinking to coincide with a group standard. Okay. One of the most interesting studies was conducted by a gentleman by the name of Ash, looking at group pressure and conformity. And he took a look at the notion of that suggestibility is a subtle type of conformity, that we adjust our behaviors or thinking towards some group standard. And what I encourage you to do is to stop the video here and go into the PowerPoint and click on the picture and watch for a little bit a recreation of Ash's famous experiment. Okay. I love this particular experiment. It's one of my favorites in the sense of just looking at the people and looking at their faces and things like that as they go through, particularly the person, who's the experimentee, not knowing that the rest of the people in the room are really, Confederates or, part of the research team. And it's marvelous is that that they go through and they're giving the wrong answer, and that poor person's looking at them like, you guys crazy, and looking back at the picture and going, what do you see that I don't see? And that first time around, will very likely give his individualistic answer of, which is the correct answer, when they're all giving the incorrect. But then, after that, and seeing the other people kind of look at him like, you're going to be one of those guys, huh? And you're not going to cooperate or whatever. And the person eventually giving the wrong answer when in fact they know that that's incorrect. But that pressure to conform can be so powerful at times. What are some of the conditions that help us to conform or strengthen our likelihood to conform? That where one is made to feel incompetent or insecure. And that a lot of times when we feel very incompetent or insecure in a social situation, that'll put pressure on us to try to act like others and trying to gain acceptance and more or less to say, hey, I'm just like you. I'm no different. And therefore I'm not incompetent unless you all are, and reduce your feelings of insecurity. That a group has at least 3 people. Okay. Now, if there's only a couple people, then you may not feel that need to act like them. But as the group gets larger and larger and larger, and they're all doing something the same way, you're going to feel more and more pressure to conform. In Ash's experiment, if there were only 2 of you in the room, you'd very likely continue to disagree with the other person when you had the wrong answer. We add another person in, and now you might start to feel a little bit of that pressure to conform when they're giving the wrong answer and you know it's wrong. But if we get 3 or 4 people in there and they're all together, you're going to feel far more the pressure to conform. The group is unanimous, as in Ash's theory. Nobody disagreed. In a version of the study is that what we do is eventually is we get one person to agree with you, and you kind of buddy up and partner up with them, and then it allows you to step out. But when everybody is unanimous, it's very difficult to step out from the group, but to give you a little bit of support, for your notion, which is different, and you may very likely take that. One admires the group status and attractiveness. The more attractive a group is in that, the more you're going to desire to fit in. And, so you dress the way they dress, and behave the way they dress, because you really want to be a member of that particular group. One has no prior commitment to a response. It's kind of like, hey, I don't have a dog in this hunt. Whatever you say, fine, I'll go with it. And the group observes one's behavior, meaning that they're watching you. You feel kind of that evaluation pressure. They're watching me, and and you feel you start to feel self-conscious, and therefore you make sure you do what you think they expect you to do. And then one's culture strongly encourages respect for a social standard. In the Asian countries, it's all about community. In the United States, we're about individuality. And here, okay, to be unique, we'll tolerate that. However, in Asian countries, it's all about fitting in and looking alike, being alike, and not rocking the boat. Okay. Some of the reasons when we look at for conforming is what we call the normative social influence. And we kind of look around and we kind of get a feel for the room is what is everybody else doing? What appears to be the norm? And here, so then the influence resulting from a person's desire to gain approval and to avoid rejection. Okay, and you look closely at the polar bear there, and you see he's wearing a little mask on the front that looks like a penguin. He wants to fit in, and doesn't want to be rejected by the group. So he's doing what he can to try to fit in, and that's one of the things here in the normative social influence. One of the key factors here is we do it because we want to fit in, and to avoid being rejected, and that's one of the key. We also have, on the other side, another type of influence that we refer to as the informational social influence. And here, it's the influence resulting from one's willingness to accept others' opinions about reality. It's kind of like how many times you've gone to a party and you haven't know how to dress. And everybody says, okay, well, white shirt and jeans. And, boom, all of a sudden, everybody at the party looks like carbon copy. Now, we got a couple guys over here in jeans with different colors and like, didn't you get the memo? Type of thing. But here, it's more or less, what should I do? They're not doing it necessarily to fit in, but, they're just, it's more kind of an information type thing, where they're feeling kind of that peer pressure is to look alike. Okay. This moves us then to our next topic, obedience. And we come in contact with a gentleman by the name of Stanley Milgram, a very famous psychologist who conducts probably one of the most controversial experiments in psychology next to Phillips and Bartle's prison study, which we saw earlier in the last unit. And he was very much interested in obedience and why we will do things sometimes that go against our will. We know that they're wrong, but yet we still do it. And one of the things here, once again, going back to, let's say, the concentration camps and trying to explain the behavior of the German guards, they knew what was going on. They knew that it was wrong. Now, during the Nuremberg trials, when we tried these people for war crimes, most of them acknowledged that they knew that it was wrong, but that they still felt pressure to obey their superiors. Why did they do that? Okay, and Milgram's study is one of the things that keys us in, and we take a look. In the particular study, what he does is, if you want to stop the video here and watch the short video that we have online in our PowerPoint, okay, what you're going to see is he's going to set up a study where he has an individual here that he refers to as the teacher. And we have a person on the other side of a wall that the teacher cannot see that is hooked up to electrical wire, and he's the learner. And the teacher is going to do is present him a list of words and ask him for which is the correct answer. And if the learner gets the answer right, then the teacher goes on to the next question. If the learner, however, misses the question, then the teacher basically administers an electrical shock. And what we can see is we have a panel here of switches that the teacher can flip, which will increase the power of the electrical shock. And what is not really evident here, but what we try to show down here, is that we go from labels like slight to moderate to strong to very strong, intense, extreme intensity, danger, severe, and then the triple X, which more or less we might as well put the skull and crossbones there, of 435 to 450 volts, which is the equivalent of electric chair and is a lethal dosage of electricity. And so, anyways, unbeknownst to the teacher, who is our subject in this experiment, the learner is sitting back here. He's part of the experiment, and when he presses the buttons to administer electrical shock, this person actually doesn't feel any shock, but will respond as though he is. In more modern experiments, we actually record a variety of responses that are played back so that we have consistency in the response that the learner is. So sometimes he's not more intense with one subject than he was with the other. But anyways, this is what we set up. So the teacher goes through and he starts to administer electrical shocks. And there's a point where, for each wrong answer, where the learner is going to start to moan in pain. And we generally will see the teacher turn towards the researcher who's sitting over here at a table, and he's got his lab coat on. Generally in these research experiments, he's a little bit older, maybe has a beard, looks very authoritative, and that is, identified as being the researcher. He'll turn and say, he's getting shocked. Should I, and he's crying out in pain. Then he simply says, the experiment must go on. Okay, and the guy turns back, reads another question, the guy misses the answer, and he has to administer another shock. And he keeps hearing the person get louder and louder and louder and begging to stop the experiment. But each time he turns around back to the researcher back here, the experimenter, and says he wants to stop, he informs him the experiment must go on. Please continue. And this person will eventually move it all the way on up, administering shock all the way up to the 435 to 450. And as we see here in this particular slide, here's the percent of the subjects who obeyed the experimenter and carried the voltage all the way up to the extreme range. And we can see 47%, almost 70% of the subjects were, willing to administer that electrical shock when given permission by a person of authority. And real revealing. Now, the controversial part of this is that if most of us were asked, would we ever do something like this, as was demonstrated in the Milgram study, we would say no. And a lot of people worry about what is the psychological effects of realizing that in fact you would do the same. You know, we'd all like to think that if we were a guard at Auschwitz or one of the other concentration camps, that we would have stood up and said this is not right. Maybe got the guards to revolt against the officers and that. However, you know, we just didn't see that. And it's because of this principle of obedience. Okay? So a third of the individuals then in the Milgram study resisted the social coercion. And this is what we refer to as individual resistance. Okay, one of the better ones, and most of you have probably seen this picture, and some of you, I'm trying to. It was a while back, so it would be when you're much younger. But the older group in this class will probably remember this very vividly. I remember actually seeing the film on TV played back of this. Is that the students are revolting in Tiananmen Square and they're having this demonstration, and the Chinese send in the military to break it up. And they're rowing a column of tanks down the street as a sign of force. And this one young brave guy gets out there and stands in front of the tank. Now, everybody would, when you're watching this, you're just horrified that, oh my God, we're going to see this guy turned into bug splat on the front of that lead tank. There's no way they're going to stop. But actually, those tanks stop. Now, this is probably not the only example, here, individual resistance, but really individual resistance is probably each of those tank drivers back here, because you can be rest assured that when they were on their radio saying, hey, we've got a guy standing out in front of our tank, smack dead in the middle, he's refusing to move, and if we go forward, we're going to run him over. And you probably got some generals sitting back somewhere saying, I don't give a darn, go forward. And this commander up here of this tank is going, I can't. He's a citizen. He's a fellow Chinaman, and I can't do that. And, as a result, the tank column came to a halt. And, these people, would, that at least that lead tank commander there would have been part of that 30% in Milgram's study, who we would characterize as having individual resistance. Okay, so what are some lessons to be learned from the conformity and obedience studies? Well, in both Ash's and Milgram studies, as you can see, the participants were pressured to choose between following their standards or being responsive to others. And what essentially we saw is that in both situations, we're more than likely to give in to the social pressure. In Milgram's study, it was even more intense because the participants were torn between hearing the victim's pleas and the experimenter's orders. And as you watch the experiment go on, you can see the torment in the teachers, so to speak, who are there having to press that button each and every time. And in the video that I have up for you to watch for this particular lecture, you can see at the end of one of those trials where the person has in fact administered the XXX dosage, they just pull away from the table and they drop their head and their shoulders down, and you can just see them as though they're almost totally physically exhausted from this experience. And there's also a major quandary in their minds. Did I hurt that person? Did I possibly kill that person? You've never seen such relieved participants as when they walk out that door, then there is the subject standing there, and then they debrief them as to what happened in the experiment. Okay. One of the latter things then that to talk about here in this section is group influence, and how do groups affect our behavior? And one of the things is that social psychologists study various group effects. One person affecting another, how our families influence, how teams influence, and how committees influence. It's one thing for an individual to say something, but for a committee to come to a like situation, that has far more impact. Here we have the principle of what we refer to as social facilitation. And it basically refers to the fact that most of us turn it up a notch or two when we're performing in front of others. It can be an example is, when you're out on the basketball court and you're being observed by people, and you put out your best game ever because, other people are watching and you want to do well. They refer to triplet study here, where he worked with cyclists and found that cyclists' racing times were faster when they competed against others than just when they raced against a clock. And that, so there's always that kind of that social evaluation. And in some cases, it can be negative. In this situation here, it's positive. I work with my I help coach a football team, a high school football team, and at practice during the week, you get effort out of people, but it's nothing compared to game night when all the fans are sitting up there, mom and dad, the girlfriends, and everybody else are sitting in the stands. Many of the players just turn it on and play extraordinarily well and way above and beyond what they did in practice. And so this testifies to this notion of social facilitation. Social loafing is another interesting principle. And where in a social situation we can turn it up, this is a social situation where we turn it down. It's a tendency of an individual in a group to exert less effort towards obtaining a common goal when they're working with their team. And some of us have probably experienced in the past when we've worked on a group project that generally when we get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working on a group project, the more they're working, sure enough, there's always somebody who's going to socially loaf on us, who's not going to carry their weight and maybe doesn't do anything, more or less figuring, they're not going to let this project fall through. They're not going to ruin their grade. They'll do it whether I do something or not. In our tug of war here, my two big social loafers here. Look at this guy. These guys are really pulling. This guy's straining. This guy's got one arm out here. Yeah, he's working hard. And look at this guy. He's backwards. And look, he's just got his hand on the rope. And is he really doing anything here? No. And kind of watching everybody and go, boy, you guys are really working hard. You're working up a sweat. I think I might break a sweat watching you guys work. Okay. Another example is this one, and kind of a favorite picture. You look at it, here's the guy up front working his tail off, and more or less looks like he's pedaling uphill. And look at her, feet up on the bar, just coasting along, smiling. What's another name for a social loafer? Freeloader. Okay, and boy, she's a prime example of somebody who is freeloading on somebody else's fine efforts. De-individuation is another situation that occurs when we're in large crowds. And de-individuation refers to the phenomenon of kind of a loss of self-awareness and self-restraint in group situations where that foster arousal and anonymity. And pick this one out here. It actually is a picture from Freaknik, which used to be the Black College's spring break that we used to host in Atlanta. And a number of years ago, we stopped doing it, following a situation where there actually was, I guess we could say, a large civil disturbance or disobedience, and where kids started smashing in windows of stores and looting the stores. What's interesting is that one or two kids started it, and many kids got involved in it. And Freaknik was one of those things that was characterized by every kid carrying a video camera or a camera, and there were multiple videos of this looting that went on that the police collected. And in the end, the police used it to go back and arrest the people who did the looting. So, these guys here probably did not fare well. Okay. However, what they found is that the initial guys who started the looting were not part of the Freaknik group. They were actually, a bunch of thugs from the neighborhood who were no-gooders anyways, who took advantage of this situation. And, maybe better psychologists than some of us who had the idea, hey, if we break a window, the way these kids are all fired up, it's going to be this crowd psychology, mob behavior is going to come in and they'll follow suit. And there will be so much going on that the police will never catch us. And they took advantage of that. Another very unfortunate example is from the game of soccer. Now, most moms, the soccer moms want their kids out playing soccer rather than football or rugby, those other contact sports because of fear of their kids getting hurt. Okay. This is actually, the next series of pictures are somewhat disturbing in the sense that they show on the real dark side of this notion of de-individuation. And what I'm going to do is let the pictures play and then come back and discuss it here. The series of pictures you saw was of a riot that occurred not too long ago at an Egyptian soccer game and broke out in the stands where a few fans on the opposing side got into a fight. And what happened is that fight basically spread throughout the stadium. People ran down on the field, going after the players of the other teams who, in this situation, very fortunately, were lucky to escape. But the fans being irate, and then the other fans from the other side came out, to stop that one group of fans from pursuing their players. Fires broke out, fighting broke out, and in the end, 74 people died in this tragic event. Not only did the riot occur within the park, but as they cleared the people out into the streets, many of them took it with them out there, and it was just too much for the police to handle. This is not an isolated incident, unfortunately. In Europe, in many of the soccer stadiums now, they put up barbed wire fences around the soccer field to keep the fans from pouring out into it, and have even put in buffer zones that are wired and chain linked off from between the home team fans and the visiting team fans because of the potential for these type of riots. But what happens is, just regular people like you or I, sitting in the stands, get caught up in all the commotion. And this notion of de-individuation where we lose self-restraint and participate, and we would think we'd never participate. I'd stop it, right? But you're surprised at how people get caught up in that. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people that left the stands that night who couldn't believe what they did and that they got drawn in to the conflict as well. Oops. Okay, sorry there, a little strobe show. Anyways, the effects of group interaction then. One of the things we look at is group polarization. And what we see out here are two lines on our graph here. Here's a high prejudice group and here's a low prejudice group. And what we're going to look at is in group polarization is that polarization is actually enhances a group's prevailing attitudes through a discussion. So if a group is like-minded, the discussion strengthens its prevailing opinion. So a group that's relatively high, very high prejudice, well, they start talking here, and by the time they finish, we can see that their prejudice actually creeps up and gets stronger. However, for a group that's low prejudice and they're discussing, oh, gee, this is a shame, we shouldn't be this way, is that look at what happens is that they of like minds discussing something will move to even a more extreme position here in the sense of having lower and lower prejudice after the discussion. So it just shows how we can become polarized. And so people that listen to liberal and conservative talk show hosts, generally most of the people usually tuning in to a liberal talk show host will be liberal, and those that are tuning into a conservative talk show host will be conservative. And it shouldn't be surprising that at the end of an hour of listening to your favorite liberal or conservative talk show host is that you find yourself feeling even more liberal or more conservative depending on your orientation and following that of the talk show host that you listen to. So we can fire up, we can increase the strength of our feelings when we're around people of like minds. Groupthink it spills over into a lot of ways. It's a mode of thinking that occurs when the desire for harmony in decision making of a group overrides the realistic appraisals of the alternatives. The attack on Pearl Harbor was one of those. Oh, they'll never attack. No, they would never attack. Well, they did. We could have been prepared, but we just couldn't believe that it would occur. There were people who felt strongly the other way, but when the majority was saying, oh, it's never going to occur, what they did is they gave in. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, another one, the Watergate cover-up. Chernobyl reactor accident, and most recently the invasion of Iraq. As we were talking about earlier, is that there were representatives and senators from the Democratic side of the aisle who disagreed with it, but because there was such an emotional push to vote for us moving into Iraq, that they all voted. And later on they come out and they say, well, privately, that they really didn't agree with it, even though they voted for it. And that's one of those things. Okay? So the influence of what we call groupthink. The last one here is just the power of individuals. Individuals can be very influential. It doesn't always have to be a member of a group, a team, or a committee to influence behavior. I think Gandhi is a prime example of this, is that his social influence was enormous, okay, in comparison to any other major organized social movement. One man, in this case, made such a difference. And for those of you who are not familiar with Gandhi, he led a nonviolent revolution in India against the British Empire to secure their freedom. And so, quite a wondrous man. And he did this through fasting and, making some very powerful and very moving speeches to people, and always emphasizing non-violence. And that brings us to the end of our lecture on part 2. And we'll come back in part 3 and talk about social relations.